It's a personal pleasure now for me to introduce Dave Senay, Global CEO of Fleischmann Hillard. Dave was actually the first speaker I approached back in November after I heard him speak at the ECO conference in Paris, where Dave spoke about the importance that the new style Fleischmann Hillard places on analytics. And over coffee, he was sharing with me the investment that as CEO he was making to make analytics happen. But let us ask Dave to tell the story. Welcome.
Thank you, Barry. Good morning, everyone. Kevin, thank you for those great remarks. Very high level, very appropriate. And I do consider myself an honorary South African, having lived there as a 14 and 15-year-old. Unfortunately, all the language I learned in Afrikaans I couldn't use in public. So I just settled for Ek kan nie Afrikaans praat nie, which means I can't speak Afrikaans. And that tended to work and get me out of a lot of trouble. Barry, thank you. David Rockland, thank you. And Jerome Scholten, thank you very much for putting this conference together. I really want to congratulate AMEC on its groundbreaking work to establish communications measurement standards, particularly as expressed in its June 2010 Barcelona declarations, which really rocked the world, I think, and its fall 2011 proposal on a framework for social media metrics, which I think was published last June. Very, very important milestone work that we can all build on. And before I go any further, I'd like to introduce our own Global Director of Research and Analytics, Christina Liao, right here. Christina. She's here not just as my lifeguard, because I can quickly get out of my depth when we get into some of these really deep analytical discussions. But I think she's also a representative of what Barry referred to and the massive investment we and many other agencies are making in people and in hardware and in software and in partnerships, trying to get a better grip on analytics and insight and how to apply that. Because it's really become the key to unlocking enormous amounts of residual creativity that, frankly, we didn't know we had. And now we know we do. So I'm going to talk about consistent standards and customizable metrics. And I think that's what the principles were about, establishing some broad, consistent set of principles. But the way we account for those standards is moving at light speed. And today we're going to talk a little bit at a more granular level about some of those shifts. So first I wanted to just show you this sign. It's a very familiar sign. It says, the building's on fire, and when it is, take the stairs and get out. And we all know what the metric of that sign would be. A success metric would be nobody died. But here's another sign that we've found in many buildings. It says, if you can't read it, it says, get out of the building before tweeting about it. Now, I don't think a success metric would be, well, we lost 6 souls, but we were trending on Twitter, and lots of retweets and favorites. So the standard has not changed, and given the new kinds of technology we have today, there are certain kinds of metrics that are useful and are not. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. This is just a little kind of a grouping of consistent standards that I think we would all agree are important to us today. Brand preference, loyalty, recommendation, friendship, connection, attention, outstanding service, value, engagement, referrals, convenience, and happiness. You know, even though we're awash in big data, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. Much of what we appreciate, much of what we truly value and want in life and in our organizations have fundamentally not changed. So what has changed are the metrics by which we measure these core values. And this is an important distinction to keep in mind, especially for all of us in the measurement community, and especially for all of us working globally in the measurement community. If we want to ensure wider adoption of measurement and analytics, especially at the international level, where there are so many nuances, cultural differences, and so forth, it's important to start the conversation with companies with an understanding of their business imperatives and objectives. So let's examine two standards, just for discussion's sake: impressions and engagement. I'm sure some of these terms look very familiar to you. Well, these are different metrics that have evolved over time to understand reach and frequency. GRPs, gross rating points; TRPs, target rating points, both created by Nielsen; VGRP, which is validated GRP, created by ComScore; VTRP, validated target rating points, created by Nielsen; VCE, validated campaign essentials; and OCR, online campaign rating, created by ComScore and Nielsen, respectively. You get the idea. There's kind of an arms race underway here to define the next level and the next level. We're still talking impressions, but now we're talking about the depth of the quality of those impressions. And while the importance of understanding reach and frequency, such as impressions, has remained consistent, what has clearly evolved is the metrics to measure it. And we go from the traditional TV metrics of GRP and TRP to the VGRP and VTRP to VCE and OCR. And in this particular area, the key word that jumps out in this evolution is the word validated. In other words, we are providing proof that we have made an impression. You know, a VGRP is analogous to the traditional online GRP, except that it only accounts for ads that were delivered in view. And we'll come back to that. In the right geography, in a brand-safe environment, and absent of fraudulent delivery, which is a real plague on the industry right now. Essentially, the VGRP measures the impressions that can actually have an impact on the consumer. There's also the VTRP, which takes into account whether the validated impressions were delivered against their intended audience targets. And the latest development is the initiative to develop viewable impression. I said I would come back to this. It's an initiative that Fleischmann-Hillard participates in to support making measurement make sense. I think some of you might be familiar with it. Are there anyone in the room working with making measurement make sense? I'm kind of surprised. Here's one hand. I'm surprised there aren't more. This is really interesting. It's a cross-industry initiative founded by the American Association of Advertising Agencies, also known as the 4As, the Association of National Advertisers, which is about every global brand in the world, and the International Interactive Advertising Bureau, the IAB. So viewable, meaning that internet ads that people actually see as opposed to ads tucked away on parts of pages that people never see. According to ComScore, a study from May 2012 to February 2013, 54% of online display ads shown during that time weren't seen by anyone. 54%. Now, since that time, they have arrived at a standard so that media companies can declare a certain level of visibility. So the new standard defines an online ad impression as being viewable. This gets really technical, I suppose. If 50% of its pixels are viewable for 1 continuous second for static display ads, and for 2 seconds for an online video ad. So we are really trying to bracket what we believe is valuable in the area of online advertising, and now we're learning what we're seeing and what we're not seeing. It's a famous quote by retailer Paul, was it Gimbel, who said, "I know half my advertising is wasted, I just don't know which half." And I was filled with hope just a few years ago that now we know which half. Well, we kind of got away from that. I think if we're starting to treat the internet like TV again, we're gonna get lost in an era when we should be having enormous amounts of accountability. So this kind of work, I think, is very important. So this evolution of metrics is one of the best examples of consistent standards with customizable metrics. And I would expect metrics in this area to continue to evolve because there is so much more data now being visible, which would be another V, as people are not only on multiple platforms simultaneously, but they declare and share the fact that they are on multiple platforms through their posts, their likes, their shares, their comments. And this allows us to be able to have a more validated measure of impression. So pretty soon, we may see something like that last box. Did I have to build that? There we go. Like the validated viewable impression, a metric that measures if an ad is both reaching the intended demographics and proving that they actually do see it. Again, an evolution of metrics, but a commitment to consistent standards, even though the word impression has taken on different dimensions, we're still talking about really making an impression. What does that mean? Let's skip to engagement. I think this slide presents a very interesting series of questions. So let's think about engagement in the framework of consistent standards and customizable metrics. Some of the questions that are being asked in the industry are like these two shown here, when people try to come to agreement on what defines engagement. On the surface, it doesn't seem anything out of the ordinary, right? You know, is there a single definition of engagement? Should the definition be different based on type of ad, device, campaign goal, or advertising category? But what if we change the way we ask these two questions to something like this? On the left is what I just mentioned. On the right, rather than ask, is there a single definition? We ask, what is the definition? And how are the metrics for engagement different based on type of ad? So not should the definition differ based on platform or device or ad, but should the metrics change based on the type of platform and delivery vehicle? So there's some subtle difference differences between those two sets of questions. And when we keep changing definition of a single term to fit a new device that comes to market, a new ad we put out, how can we expect widespread adoption or agreement? It quite frankly gives people an easy way out of not adopting what you're trying to do, trying to tell them to do. And in our view, this doesn't apply, or for them to say, this doesn't apply in my industry or in my region, or for the type of device we have. So let's define engagement for what it is, the extent to which audiences interact with the brand. And then evolve the metrics over time to measure the success and engagement and when new devices come on market, when campaign goals change, or new categories emerge. So while platforms, devices, ads, campaigns, etc. will change and evolve, thus the need for evolution in metrics for measurement, business standards, and objectives remain consistent. This is how the industry will be moving forward in a very rapidly changing environment. I want to talk about one example of this that is a reflection of our growing understanding of how people consume media and what matters to them. This is our T5 approach, which is social content optimizer for optimal engagement. We're happy to bring it here today. It actually won an AMEC award last year. And we define optimal as achieving highest level of effectiveness in combination with the highest level of efficiency. Let me just quickly get, this is actually the formula of 5T. We initially began with just 3 T's because we had to understand more and more dimensions of how people interacted. Those 3 T's were the first 3 on the left: topic, type, and timing. And later on, we've added threshold and text length, and we'll get into what this means and why this has an impact on how people are consuming and engaging with your social media. So there are a bunch of platforms out there. We didn't want to boil the ocean, as they say, so we wanted to focus on one platform in particular and then build from there. And that platform was Facebook. And so through a combination of deep human analysis and online tools, we were able to apply science to the art of social content creation and optimizing engagement. And we are exploring, as I mentioned, whether there are other T's. We are currently debating a 6th T for consideration. And again, our standards, or what we are trying to accomplish with this, didn't change, which is to ensure optimal engagement. However, the metrics continue to evolve to reflect the new reality. So let me give you a quick example, and we'll finish up. Here's an example of how we use the results for one particular client. Data and analytics are what drive the development of 5Ts, and we took historical Facebook posts for one of our clients and analyzed the topics, timing, and post type to see how they related to the likes, comments, and shares for these posts. We made recommendations for the optimal level of each T based on the analysis results. So, of course, our recommendation for the threshold levels for each T will differ depending on the brand and depending on the platform. Now you can see, because of the green checks, in this case, the companies seem to be doing very well in both type of media, in this case, heavy use of photos, and threshold category. They did not need to change. They were putting up about 46 posts per month, which seemed to suit the appetite of the people they were trying to reach. However, they could have a much more focused topic list with better timing and fewer characters in their posts. this stuff really matters. You know, we were talking about, if you look at just text length, what was the text length before? It was like 206 or something. Yeah, 203. So these are very fine tunes, and you start to get it right across all of these variables, and you can have a really big impact. For example, on timing, 9 a.m. daily was the primary time, the optimal time to be putting out your posts. And do less on Fridays. You know, people were busy. They were not paying that much attention anymore. So we advise them on this. And of course, when you have this kind of data, it really makes you drill into your audience and their needs and their interests and what turns them on and their passions. And it helps you create a much more intimate connection to them. This is what happened. What you'll see in the dotted line, this is a 15-month total engagement score, and it's clear that the quality of content and the balancing of the 5 T's is what's driving engagement and not a higher number of posts. The dotted line above shows the number of posts. And you actually see about May 12 of 2012, a peak of brand posts. The vertical dotted line on June 12th shows when we engaged 5 T's. And you see a slow decline in posts, but you see a fairly dramatic upturn in engagement scores. And this is simply by understanding what the elements are of what you do that really matter. And just to show you the sharing that went with this, again, sort of a similar format. The sharing numbers just skyrocketed after June of 2012. Made a big impact. We went from an average of about 20,000 shares per month up to 100,000 shares per month average. And this was all accomplished in about 10 months. Now we're doing this across a wide variety of platforms now. We're looking at Twitter, Google+, and so on. Now, in the interest of time, Barry, I'm going to bring this to a close. A number of other points we could probably make in the panel. I want to thank you all very much.
Dave, you spoke about, in your opening remarks, about how insights had, your words were unlocking enormous amounts of residual creativity that you didn't even know that you had. Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, you know, in our business, and I've been with Fleischmann Hillard since 1984, when an RFP came in, what was the reflex reaction? Let's have a brainstorm. And if you're lucky, maybe you got some secondary research from the client, which may or may not have been good. Kevin found that their client research was not very good, and not very original, and not very on point. So you subject yourself to a lot of vagaries in terms of data input. But what insight does is give you that powerful, illuminating fact about the audience that suddenly gives you a laser-like focus and inspiration for creativity. You're far more likely to arrive at a transformative idea, a powerfully transformative idea, based on that insight that is suitable specifically for that assignment, and then applicable across a unique set of media activation that would only be suitable for that group that you're trying to reach and for that idea. Without it, there's a lot of shotgun firing going on, you know, and you need to rifle target. And this is where I come down on the discussion is big data killing creativity, I'll tell you what, not for us. It's liberating.
Let's go to the, can you bring a microphone down here to the lady, please?
Hi, Jenny Chapman from Gorkana Group, Managing Director, U.S. So I thought we were going to get really exciting here and start. You talked about paid media and the journey of metrics from GRPs to TARPs to then viewable impressions. Now I'd like to see that slide for what is it from the earned media, right? What's the metrics we should be looking at, and we're going to have a go at AVEs. We
Right.
didn't get there, so I think that would be interesting.
AVEs?
Yeah.
Does anyone have garlic and a cross and a wooden stake?
How many people here still get asked by some clients for
No,
AVEs?
I get you on that. I was the president of the jury, a PR jury at Cannes, and I was followed by Gail Hyman of Weber Shandwick, and last year David Gallagher of Ketchum. And we made a breakthrough in the guidelines issued by Cannes. They gave 3 guidelines for results. Not one of them mentioned add value equivalent. Not one. So I think, and I think AMEC had a big hand to do with that. But I think you raise a very good point. Unfortunately, right now, many of the PR measures are based in sort of a vestigial way on what came out of advertising. So how are we proving the activation and the engagement? And I do worry that some mediums, lately I'm hearing that Facebook algorithms are now favoring the paid presence, which is not good news for public relations firms. So we still have more work to do, and hopefully this is just the first steps in applying the principles that you've seen us outline here today, because most of that T5 was not just about paid media. It was about what you posted organically, which I would consider editorial and not paid media. So we are starting to put some real rigor behind the craft as well.
Thank you. I think we had one more question at the back.
Greg Senay with Golan Harris. I actually had
Just wait for the
Hello,
mic.
Greg.
Hey, Dave, how are you?
All right.
I actually had almost the identical question,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
maybe I'll give you just another 30 seconds to talk, if you would, about how the world of earned media can be differentiating from or improving upon the kinds of metrics that have sort of emerged out of advertising. If you
Yeah.
want that 30 seconds, because
No,
I really
no.
did have the same question.
I do. I do need the 30 seconds, and now I have 27. I think there's been a certain mischaracterization of what earned media can do for brands. Yes, earned media can ring the cash register, because it does. But to look at PR as only in terms of transactional ROI is a big mistake. Witness what we just heard. Strengthening the foundations of corporate reputation, because there are massive intangible benefits. What was it, 55% of the market value? I had heard as much as 65% from Ernst & Young. Depends on who you talk to. I don't think we need to look at it just simply in terms of the measurements of old. And I do think we have to fight in a very militant way to show that earned media creates an environment where sales are possible. And there's no question in my mind that the reputational drivers that were spoken of earlier have an inordinate impact on the decision to purchase and decision to recommend, far more than is given credit for, which does speak well for us, assuming we can get the point across. Thank you.
One final question from the front.
My name is John Friesland. I'm from Retriever, Sweden. You had a slide where you rephrased the question concerning engagement, and you changed the or to the and. And in that rephrasal, there is a meaning of what kinds of data should be, or what kinds of metrics should be used for different purposes. Do you have a list for that sort of? Do you have the blueprint for how to measure in those cases?
Yeah, Christina, do you want to address some of that?
Bring a microphone.
Come on
to
up if you want.
Yeah, come up to the stage, Christina. It's easier.
Christina will be moderating the panel later.
Yeah, right.
This will be a good
I'll
warm-up.
talk to Paul. Yeah, so when we get into those customizable metrics, what we do is that we sit down with the clients and company and look at what they want to define. So for example, we gave an example of engagement, right? So we first agree on that. And the reason we show the subtlety in those two set of questions is that agree on the definition, then you can move on, right? So you're progressing to that optimal stage you want to. So then we look at, okay, for your industry, once we agree on the engagement, what are the categories? So you actually help you narrow down, right? So for some industry, maybe there are only 2 devices that apply. For another industry, it may be 5 devices, right? So you're gradually getting closer to where you're trying to get to, right? So if your device is only tablet and iPhone, for example, or if your ad is in a particular category, then you look at that and say, what are the specific metrics for each of those types? So you're getting closer to that. So there's a general principles in terms of how you do that, but we wouldn't have just one metrics. That's why we call it the customizable metrics, because the metrics need to reflect the reality of the industry standards. But even because you have the standards being consistent, when you compare across, you can still make some kind of comparison, right? With the understanding that your metrics are different, but you're measuring the same goals or objectives in the end.
In the old days, we could speak in broad generalities, but I have never seen a time when there's been more pressure on productization and on packaging and on specificity. So what we have today, come back a year from now, and we're going to have a whole different suite based on the types of devices and other platforms that impact engagement.
Yeah, even our example of the 5 Ts we have, some of the new platforms we're looking into, we may only need 3 Ts, for one of the platforms. So, but the concept, the standards is still there. We're trying to understand what's the optimal engagement.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you,
Thank you very much.
Christina. Thank you.